This is based upon the original graphic novel or comic books 30 Days a Night by Steve Niles and Ben Templesmith. So I thought now would be a good time to talk about the differences between the film and the comic book because I imagine a lot of people who are listening to this maybe have seen 30 Days a Night or are going to see 30 Days a Night and maybe haven't read the comic, and that's totally okay. So I want to kind of lay out some of the differences between the comic and the movie so you understand the differences. Now, let's just start with the premise. The premise is exactly the same. The town of Barrow, Alaska is cut off from the world, and vampires come there and attack because there's no daylight. They have free reign to eat and draw blood from everybody in town. That's all exactly the same. Now, the biggest difference in terms of the characters, Eben and Stella in the comic book are actually still very happily married. They're not separated. They're not at odds with each other. They're certainly not teetering on divorce. They're very much a happy married couple. Now, the stranger coming into town, burning the cell phones, that's all the same. The biggest difference in terms of the characters in 30 Days a Night, the comic book, versus 30 Days a Night, the movie, is there are no side characters. There are characters who are in 30 Days a Night, the comic book, but Eben and Stella are really our only two main characters. We really get intimate and feel like we spend a lot of time with. There is no Jake. There is no Grandma Helen. There is a Billy. There is a deputy and things like that. We do see that. We also get the sense that Eben and Stella are a little older. It seems like they're maybe in their 30s or maybe early 40s versus they seem like late 20s, early 30s, maybe mid 30s.
Yeah, barely 30s.
Very, very young in this movie. Now, the biggest difference between the comic book and the movie is the vampires themselves, because in the comic book, the vampires, while they are still very animalistic and very ferocious, they are also a lot more human. They speak English, they talk, they're very cognizant of what they're doing. There is one part where you actually see communications and emails where the vampires are emailing each other to like plot this attack. So it's a lot more, human element to the vampires. And also Marlowe, the lead vampire in this movie played by Danny Houston, in the comic book, Marlowe is the leader of this gang of vampires, but the head vampire, the main vampire, the ancient vampire, is a guy named Vicente, and they try to reach out to Vicente to get him to come because Marlowe has this tremendous idea to attack this town of Barrow and have a feast for 30 days. When Vicente finally shows up in town, he's pissed off because he thinks Marlowe is making a huge mistake because he's risking exposure. Because all throughout history, the vampires have been hunted and killed by humans when they've actually been discovered. So now vampires live in very small bands and they stay hidden so they're not discovered. And so Vicente shows up and wrecks house and actually kills Marlowe in the comics and basically says, "You're an idiot. You're a moron for doing this. We're going to burn this town down so no one knows we are here." So in the show where they burn down the town to cover their track, or in the movie, they burn down the town to cover their tracks. They do that in the comic book as well, but it's the same. It is ultimately the same purpose, which is to cover their tracks to prove they were never there. In the comics, it's because Vicente shows up and says, "Marlowe, you're an idiot. What are you doing launching this attack?" The other small element that is different between the comic books and the movies is there is a vampire hunter element to the comic books, whereas there's a woman we meet in New Orleans, and we believe it's her son, who she sends to Barrow, who's in a helicopter taking photos of the vampires attacking. He's not meant to intercede. He's not meant to intervene whatsoever. He's just to basically take proof vampires exist. The whole point of that storyline is actually carried on into the sequel in the comic book, because there are a lot of 30 Days a Night comics that carry on beyond this original 3-issue series. That little vampire hunter sect ends up playing a major part in Dark Days, I believe is the sequel. But in the comic, the guy who shows up in a helicopter and then Vicente and Marlowe kill him in the helicopter crashes. But that's another element that is just weirdly in there, and you can tell it's being set up for a sequel, whereas in the movie, they didn't really need that element, and I'm kind of glad they didn't put it in there. So those are the major differences between the movie. The premise is the same. A lot of the main characters are the same. Marlowe's there, Stella's there, Eben's there, Eben is there, so you mean Stella. They're all there. But a lot of the side characters aren't. A lot of the plot development is different, and the main thing is the vampire differences, which is This is like an orchestrated attack through email on the comic book. Obviously, the movie is not like that. So those are the major differences between 30 Days a Night the movie and 30 Days a Night the comic book.